Hey everyone! In this tutorial I go over a couple ways I use to add paint or writing or stickers on top of objects that already have UVs applied. Let's go into Cinema 4D and check it out. Alright, so here we are in Cinema 4D and I've brought in this asset that I've downloaded from exterior.com. There's a link in the description below. And I have it set up and I've got the diffuse, the roughness, and the normal map all set up along with a displacement map. So when thinking about decals or overlays on top of 3D objects, there's probably, I don't know, like a dozen different ways one could go about doing this. So I just wanted to show some of the methods that I use and specifically how these methods apply to objects with UVs already applied. So this object came in all nicely UV unwrapped and textured from exterior. And if we wanted to visualize the UVs and how they're split up, we can drop in a state node and set UVW coordinates to the output and just hit render. So we can see how these are split up on this object. So we've got this sort of patchwork going on here, but with the material selected, it is seamless. So we need to figure out a way to apply our stickers, or for instance, like we wanted to paint over part of this, like coat this rock object with some paint on only certain parts. We need to do that separate from the UVs that are applied. So there's a few different ways we can do that, but mostly I've been utilizing a relatively new node in Redshift. This came out, probably, well, I don't know, a handful at least of releases ago. It's the UV projection node. And so if I drop that on to the shader graph along with a ramp, and I can just plug the ramp right into the texture color input on the UV projection node and select that to go to the surface. So we would get something, but let's go back and check our ramp. The ramp is set to vertical, and we can sort of clamp this down, and we start to see that, just like you'd expect, the ramp is being applied top to bottom on our object. But the nice thing about the UV projection node is that we have more control over this on our object. So the first thing I'll do, I'm going to set the coordinate space from world to object and redo our ramp here. So we're going to have to move that a little bit. There we go, just so we can see it. The reason why I'm doing that is if I were to take this back to world coordinates, and I'll just leave it like it is, and if I was going to rotate the object, whoops, I had that locked. You can see the object sort of floats through this projection, and I don't want that. I want the ramp to stay stuck to the object. Now if I rotate this, it is stuck. Great. But the nice thing about the UV projection node is that I can come in here and rotate the projection and move it around, and these are going to be really sensitive. Whoops, to do Y. So 0.1, you can see it jumps quite a bit. 0.01, you start to move this up and down and get a little bit more control over where we place the projection. So right now it's just set to planar, and that's what we want for the ramp. Because in this case I'm thinking, let's sort of paint the far right side of this rock. We're going to coat it in like some sort of shiny, glossy paint. So let's change the ramp from vertical to horizontal, and I'm going to shift these over and kind of reset the camera here. So something like that for now, because basically I'm going to use a material blender to blend between the rock material and our paint material. And we want the paint material to show up on the right side of the rock. So I've got the ramp set to white on that side, black being 0, white being 1, so off and on. So we want the paint to be on where it's white. So I'm going to grab another material and very quickly set this up. For right now, I'll just make it like black. And I'll take the roughness up a little bit here, but also add some coating to it. Kind of another glossy element on top. And if I set that to the output, we can see what that looks like on top of the whole rock. So because I have the displacement still on, we can see it's quite textured. Also, the model itself has some texture to it. So all that is working as expected. So now what we need to do is just take a material blender and we'll put the rock material into the base material and our paint material into layer 1. Now we're going to use the UV projection black and white map as the blend color. So all this is pretty straightforward, but I did want to show you a couple things that I've been experimenting with to get a little bit more realistic paint material and transition. Pull this over a little bit more. I'm going to go into the ramp and I'm going to take the noise frequency down quite a bit and the noise amount up slightly. And I'm just going to adjust this a little bit in order to give that transition a little bit of a wobble. So it's not so uniform. Another thing we can do is drop in a color layer and put the projection to the base. Click off layer 1 for now so we can see it. Drop in a max on noise. And I'm going to set this to something like Naki, but put the scale very low. Let's see, no, even lower. 0.01. I'll up the contrast slightly. And I'm going to set this to layer 1 color. We'll enable layer 1 and see it just covers the whole thing. But we'll set this to overlay, and that way the noise is just going to show up in the transition between the black and the white, between 0 and 1. So we've got this nice sort of overspray effect, and we can accentuate that by cranking up the contrast more and playing with the scale, maybe 0.2, 0.02. Ah, it's too much. 5, maybe. That's fine. So that's subtle, but it just gives that extra level of detail. Another thing we can do is, instead of coating the whole thing, we could drag in another node here for our ramp and do like a spray painted line. And we still have control over this if we wanted to make this go if we wanted to make this go across the rock, and we can still go back and adjust this noise amount. Another thing you notice here, we'll need to grab another ramp. Before that, we're going to need to make sure that we're actually using our color layer as the blend color. Also, can sort of adjust these fall off. I'm going to hold down the number 2 and zoom in on the ramp here and just get a little bit more detailed, and maybe alt drag another white node out to thicken up the spray paint line, and maybe something like that. But we need to take care of the gloss fall off on this, so can use a ramp to dial this in. Zoom back out here. So I want to set this to reflection roughness. And for this one, take a look at this. I think we need to reverse this because we want the paint to be shiny and the rock to be dull. So we just want to invert this gradient. And for the main roughness, I don't want this to go completely glossy. I want to kind of keep this a little bit more matte. And I'm going to copy that ramp and make this one darker and use this for the coat roughness. So that should be a little bit more accurate there. So now the gloss is happening just on the glossy paint. We can adjust that here as well. Maybe that's not so glossy. All right, so I'm just gonna go back and maybe just sort of remove this other section here. So we just have the front part coated. I'll go back to the UV projection and change the location of this. Yeah, something like that. And maybe we'll just make this, I don't know, like a blue. And I do want to just take the overspray down a little bit. All right. So another thing we can do is, let's say we really wanted to coat this in a thick layer of paint. So what would happen is we would probably get a lot less detail in this section of the rock. Now, this rock does have some detail, quite a bit of detail actually, in this scan. So the geometry, look here, I mean, it's very dense. So we have this sort of rough texture on the surface of the rock, but the displacement map is taking care of a lot more of that detail. So another thing we can do if we wanted to really push the idea that this rock is being coated in like a thick layer of paint, just make a little bit of room here. And I'm going to pull out a color layer node along with a color correct node. So what I want to do is put the original displacement right into the base color, and I'm going to pull this into the input of the color correct node, and let's just take a look at this. So here's just what the displacement map looks like, but what I want to do is decrease the contrast and brighten it up just slightly, because what I want to do is use the projection as a mask. We can do that right now, actually. Set this to layer 1 mask, and this to layer 1 color. And when we pipe this in, it should look exactly the same, but when we start to change this, so if I pull the contrast down, you can see this side here has a lot less detail than this side. And I can increase this for visual sake here. That's quite a bit. I mean, that's too much. I'd probably just do like 1.1. And what that'll do is just kind of inflate that section just ever so slightly. So it's a little bit brighter than the base brightness of the rest of the rock. So now if we pipe this into the displacement and set our material blender to the output, we can get an even more smoothing out effect. We can just pump this up so we can kind of see what's going on. If I set this to 5 instead of 1, this is gonna kind of go nuts, but should be able to see the effect a little bit better. So if I take the contrast down, you see the details kind of fading away. And if I pump this up to 1.8, you see this side kind of balloon out. Right. So it's a subtle effect, and depending on the model, if a lot of the texture in your model is relying on that displacement map, this will, of course, have a much greater effect than if the, some of the detail and the texture is already built into like a high-res scan, which this is. But I'll leave this back to a 1.1 and put this up a little bit more and reset our displacement. Right, so of course, that's one layer, and you could paint over it again if you wanted, add another line over it, the same method. It would just be adding another one of these, basically. Make some room here. Adding another one of these to our material blender. So real quick, whoops, select the UV project and maybe do, maybe do like a little line, and 2 to zoom in. I'll try to even that out a little bit. Okay, we've got our sort of overspray with the noise, and this, let's make it black. and make that line a little bit more pronounced. There we go. Oops. Cool. And if I wanted to rotate that, of course, I could. If I wanted to move it up and down, it's really sensitive, but 0.05. Have the control to change it. And if you did want to like mask it out, like if you didn't want, you know, this to be right here, it's just as easy as adding it to your, you know, another ramp or something you just want to, you know, if we take a look at the color layer here that's making our mask for the material blender, it would just be a matter of maybe putting another gradient in, another one of these, and then just multiplying it over this, or a noise over this to, let me just show you. All right, maybe something like that, and just put this onto layer 3. Whoops, I skipped one. Let's do layer 2. And layer 2 set to multiply. So one thing you'll notice here is this is multiplying over our noise overspray. And we really want that to be last. So I'm going to move this down a little bit, and I'm actually going to plug this into layer 7. And I'm just going to put this as layer 1 color. So layer 1 is going to be set to multiply, and I'm going to disable layer 2 and go all the way down to layer 7, enable it, and change it to overlay. And that way, if you're going to add up and keep changing this, you don't have to keep going in and reorganizing the layers. I found that I've started to kind of go backwards in here because it's a pain to redo all the nodes and like reorder them. I've been kind of going backwards. But yeah, if we go back and put the material blender back on, got a faint line here. Yeah. So maybe something like that. So when it comes to doing something like a sticker, there are a few ways to go about this. You know, one, we can do sort of a similar thing here where we do it within the texture, or we can do it with geometry on top of our base geometry. So one of the things that I found worked relatively well was to make a plane. And I'll just set that to Z+ and scale it down and just move it in front of our rock here. And I'll just sort of scale this down into a relatively similar shape to the sticker I had in mind. If it was like a circle sticker or like, you know, a long rectangle, I'd probably want to approximate that with this plane shape. But just leave it a square, maybe a little bit smaller. And move this over here, a little bit closer to our geometry. I'm going to increase the segments quite a bit for this, like 80 by 80. And I'm going to use a shrink wrap deformer. Put that right under the plane, and then I'm going to drag the rock into the target object. And you can kind of see it. Let me just make this big here. So you can kind of see this here. It is sort of embedded inside the rock. It's sort of matching a little bit too perfectly. And if I hit render here, we probably won't be able to see this. Yeah, can't see it. Couple reasons. It's probably a little bit too exact on our geometry, but we also have displacement enabled on our texture. So it's sort of pushing out away from this surface. So what we need to do is take our plane, and I will hold down Alt and drop a, nope, backwards, plane effector, hold down Shift. I'm going to put the plane effector after the shrink wrap. Under deformer, I'm going to set the deformation to 0. and maybe like 0.5. Let's try that. Negative 0.5. Yeah. Okay. So you can see this is pushing out, and it's quite a bit. So it looks like kind of a lot here on this view, but let's take a look in our render and see how close we are. So I'm gonna have to push that even further to counteract that displacement. Yeah, not enough. Ooh. 0.65. And this gets tricky with the displacement because the displacement texture may not be evenly displacing this in all areas. So you could get areas where the rock pokes through the sticker in this case and floating pretty far off the surface in another. So I can try to maybe get this a little bit closer. 5.5. Yeah, you can see it's still kind of floating away here, but we're getting some intersections up top. So maybe 5.7. 5.7 seems to be pretty good. And depending on how close you are to the model, how zoomed in you are, this might be fine. Also want to take that noise down even smaller. Yeah, cool. So the nice thing about this is that it's just using the shrink wrap deformer. Now we can, the plane selected, we can rotate it and move it around. It'll stay on the surface. You know, so that's nice. And that, you know, if you can put a texture on there with, you know, your opacity. And that's one way to go. So I can just do that real quick. Just make a new material. So I have a PSD file that I made. I'm just going to use a color splitter and take the alpha and set that to opacity color and use a ramp to color it something more interesting than black and white. Yeah. And because we have this so heavily subdivided, we're still getting a lot of the texture of the rock. And that does allow us to sort of keep it as close to the surface as possible. If we had less subdivisions, we probably wouldn't be getting this, this level of detail in here. It's following the contour. So that's nice. I feel like that's a good way to do it in some situations, because we do have control later on and we can just visually see this, you know, this shape, and we have pretty good control over how it is placed on the object. So you could get this sort of tearing effect if you push the object up above the surface. They're sort of like projecting it up and it doesn't know where to go, but I think we can sort of reset this if we just sort of rotate it towards the object a little bit better. Just want to get that projection to kind of match the contour of the surface. It should work a little bit better. Something like that. All right, so another way to add this on would be a similar method to the paint overlay. I'm just going to try to clean this up a little bit and make a little bit more room. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this here and grab another material out. And I'm going to pull in a different sticker type. And the same deal, I'm going to do another color splitter. I want to separate the alpha channel The alpha goes into overall opacity color. Yes, maybe do like a blue sticker and just put that onto the diffuse color. Okay, so what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to make a regular old standard Cinema 4D material and open up the other window here. Turn off reflectance, don't need it. In the color channel, just want to go down to surfaces and just do checkerboard. And I'm going to apply this checkerboard material right to our rock. And now we have this update, and you can see the UVs here and how they're kind of chopped up here in this patchwork. And, you know, if we wanted the sticker right here, we could be fine. But if we wanted to move it up here, that's not going to work. We've got a seam there, so the sticker would disappear. So what we want to do is on this material, we don't want to use the standard UVs that are, you know, this UV mapped from the rock. We want to make our own. So I'm going to go down to flat projection, and you can see just head on. But what I want to do is right click on this texture and do fit to object. And now if I select my texture tool, you can see here I've got this fit exactly to this rock. Now my sticker is a square, so I'm actually going to pull this in and make sure that my texture is actually in the shape of a square. You know, for right now, that is really lagging. So for right now, I am going to turn off this shrink wrap sticker. But if I'm happy with this, what I can do is just, you know, right click on this and do current state to object. And now I can disable these and just hide them. And now I've got this sticker on here. You know, obviously I won't be able to move it and have it stick to the surface, but if I'm happy with that location, then I can turn that off, and my viewport should be much faster now. It's one of the downsides to using that method. The shrink wrap deformer is a bit slow, so this should be, there we go. It's much better now, more responsive. So I'm going to scale this down so I can kind of see about the size that I want this sticker. You can kind of see this, do a little bit smaller. And yeah, let's say that's good. Actually, let's, if I didn't want it straight on, let's say I wanted it up a little bit more, I could rotate this so that it is sort of even with my viewport here. So that way I can put this rock kind of on that, you know, where I was talking about that seam in the UV. Now, I've got this angled in a way that should be fine. But what I need to do now in order to use this is right click on this material and generate UVW coordinates. And I immediately want to go over here and go to basic, and I'm going to rename this sticker 2 UVs. I'm going to pull this texture back, and you can see now our original texture is utilizing this UV, but we want to make sure it's using the old UV. So it needs to be first. Just needed a refresh, I guess. So let's just make sure that's working. We're okay, great. So now for this texture, I can use this UV channel here and drag in our sticker 2 UV. And if I put this directly on the output, see this is now repeating all over the surface, and it is from this viewpoint here. So we see some stretching down here at the bottom where this is sort of, you know, breaking, but we really only want one sticker. So what we need to do is turn off wrap U and wrap V, and we've got our one sticker, but we don't. It's going right through. So no problem. So now what we need to do is basically create a mask, and there's a few different ways to do this. We can paint it on, we can use a vertex map and use that as a mask, but I've just been sort of utilizing the same ramp with UV projection. So if I take this down here and pipe this in. Don't need any noise. There we go. So basically we just want a white part up here. So sort of crunch this down, and we can move this up and rotate it. So if we rotate this along the X, we should be sort of rolling this up, and now we can move it either with this, oops, we did move it in the Y direction. There we go, and a little bit more. So now we've got a mask here where it's black on the back. So now we can sort of delete that other double sticker on the back if we didn't want it. So let's pipe this into layer 3 and layer 3 blend color. Right. So skipped a step there, which I'm glad I did, because we need to, the alpha is what we need combined with the UV projection. So I need a color layer here. Right, so we need the alpha as the base. And then we need to multiply this on top of it. So if we set this to multiply and take a look at this, now it's going to be just this shape. Right? Yes. So now we just have this shape, whereas before we just had all of this. So we were sort of deleting all of this from the geometry. This is all gone. Right. Now this goes into blend color 3. Right. So with this, I mean, we do have a little bit of leeway to move this around. We can use the offset here, and I think we need to just go very subtly and sort of push and pull this around. But as we go further down here, those UVs, it's going to start to stretch. And we would have to readjust our mask if we wanted to move it around. But, you know, we set the UVs up at this angle up here. So this is where this is going to be sort of projected more square. But as we move this down, we're sort of stretching out, you know, those UVs are stretching out. So we're going to start to elongate this sticker. So another thing we can do here is just add a bump and use the alpha as a bump. Probably want to add this to the bump of the rock. Let's do a bump blender and do the regular as the base. And we're going to add the bump sticker to that and set it to 1. Let's see if we can get a little bit better bump out of it. Yeah, seems like it's okay. Yeah, got a little bit more separation. There's a little bit of shadow, and that way give the effect that it's sitting up off the surface. Yeah. All right. Let's say I moved that down a little bit too far. Probably needs to go up a little bit. Okay. You know, another thing that we can do here is pretty much the same method, is adding scratches or writing onto a surface. So it's pretty much the same method. So I'll kind of walk through how I would prep that in Photoshop and just sort of make a custom map where I've written as though I was writing on the surface of this rock. All right, so here I am in Photoshop, and I've just got a 2048 by 2048 square comp here, and I've got a charcoal or chalk brush selected. I've just decided that's the look I'm going to go for, like a chalk drawing on this rock. And I guess first thing I'm going to just paint this black. So I'm going to do white on black chalk. So I don't know. So let me just save this. I'm just going to save this as a JPEG. All right. So we're back in Cinema, and I'm just going to make a little bit more room. All right, so I've got the this writing texture in here, and I'm thinking I'm going to put it like right here, like right on the front. It's going to go like right in this area here. So what I'm going to do is pull that checkerboard pattern texture back out on top, and I'm going to set it back again to flat. And I'm going to adjust my squares here, the angle of this, so that looks pretty good. Like straight on. And I'm actually going to scale this up slightly. I want this a little bit bigger. Yeah. All right, and I'm going to select the tag and generate UVW coordinates. Just rename that chalk UVs. I'm going to put the checkerboard texture back behind our rock texture, and immediately go back to our chalk writing and drag in our new chalk UVs. And I can turn off wrap U, wrap V. Just preview that. Okay, I can just offset this. Maybe scale it up even more, 0.7. All right, just need to make a new material, chalk material. Just make it pretty rough. Probably want to add a bump to this. Just like a max on noise, we'll just do like a pretty detailed bump, or maybe FBM. Yeah, maybe something like that. Yeah, okay, that's got a nice rough look to it. Maybe even crank the bump up even more, just exaggerate it. And I purposely saved this out as a JPEG because we can set this to the overall opacity, and that still works, but we are still still have that same problem where it's being projected right through. So the luminance of this texture is being used for the opacity. I kind of thought we had to check that on. I really thought that wasn't going to work until alpha is luminance was checked, but it looks like it's handling that just fine. So the only other thing we need to do is, actually, we may need to do that. Let's see. So we need a color layer. So we just need to grab a mask from our ramp and UV projection node. So I'm just gonna copy that down here. Whoops. Come on. There we go. And let's solo this. And basically we just want white on this side and black on this side. Okay. So let's just zero these out. And I think we just need to rotate on the x-axis to bring the white from the top to the front. So let's see here, which way do we need to go? Looks like that is pretty good. Let's see if we've got it. We just want white on the front and black on the back. That's it. All right, so we just need to multiply that on top of our opacity map. So we'll set layer 1 to multiply. Okay, so this is interesting. It's a little bit not what I was expecting, to be honest. So this is alpha is luminance. Does matter here in terms of the color layer. I don't believe it matters in terms of using it in just this texture. But what I'm not understanding here is the multiplication of... I would think that we shouldn't be getting this white on top. It would just be the black on the bottom, but let's try this a different way. Let's put this into layer 1, and this is set to add, and we should still have this on both sides. Yes, we don't want that. So now this is going to be the mask for layer 1. Now it should only be allowing the front to be visible. Let's just double check this. Yes, so that works. It's probably a little bit more straightforward than this other way of utilizing the... Make sure this works either way. Now, yeah, same thing. So utilizing the JPEG here as trying to pull the alpha channel out of the luminance can cause some issues. So I would just set it up this way as a layer with a mask rather than the base layer with a multiplication on top of it. So I think that opacity would kind of affect the way this is being applied. So now that we have this, we can just plug this in. As layer 4, and this is layer 4 blend color, and I think we might want to pull the bump and add it onto the other one, but let's take a look and see. Oh, that is barely coming through. See if we can adjust that a little bit. I'm going to lower the gamma a little bit just to pull that up, just so it's coming through a little bit clearer. And I'm going to pull this bump map up and add it to our bump blender of the rock texture. I don't know if I can do this. Oh man. So many nodes. There we go. And just add this 100%. So we get a really chunky chalk addition. Oh, that seems to not be working. And that could be because so I used the noise. Whoops, back down we go. So we just need to add another color layer here for this. So let's do it this way. Let's add this noise to layer 1. And we're going to use the writing itself as a mask, layer 1 mask. and we'll make a new bump up here. And that way we can just control it separately. Yeah, that seems better. So now here's where we'd probably want to reorganize the layers of this, because I would think that we'd really want the chalk to be first, and then the stickers on top, and then the sticker and paint on top of it. So that's sort of where, you know, we can just reorganize our material blender and move the chalk up in the stack. So I'm going to do that and speed it up and take a look. All right, yeah, I think that's working, looking pretty good. Another thing here, since we did make this sticker here editable, we just call this sticker. We do want to make that a child of the rock. That way we rotate this, we'll stick with it. Perfect. There we go. Guess I was rotating the sticker and not the rock. All right, I think that pretty much wraps it up. It's basically the same sort of ideas either way. If you're applying a sticker or some writing, it would just be setting the UVs for that specific item that you wanted and then masking out the projection from the opposite side. And, you know, I showed here the ramp and UV projection node to do that. You could also go in and use a vertex map and paint it by hand. Adrian from Redshift has some examples of doing a similar thing, showing that method. I've been finding that the UV projection node has been pretty useful. It does take a little bit of getting used to understand exactly how, you know, we're modifying the ramp or whatever we're plugging into it, a texture or whatever. For me, now that I've gotten sort of a handle on it, that has become sort of the quickest way for me. So of course, if you have any questions or comments, or if you know of a better, simpler way to do this, definitely leave a message for me in the comments below. I will be checking those pretty frequently. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching and liking and subscribing. It's been really great to see how many people have been interacting with the tutorials, so I really appreciate it. So thanks so much, and until next time.